Nigel Farage has 5 MPs, you've got 403. Are you panicking because Reform is so far ahead in the polls, it seems? Is he living rent-free in your brain? You went to a state school, your dad worked in a factory, your mum worked in the NHS, so why has a public school-educated former city trader got more in common with the Red Wall than you have?
And I want to protect working people from Nigel Farage because I want to protect them from what he will do, which is exactly the same as Liz Truss, which will have a direct impact on their lives. So I don't need lessons from Nigel Farage about the issues that matter most to working people in this country. Thank you, Chris.
What unfolded in Parliament today was not ordinary political theatre. It was a direct collision with history, an event that rewrote the playbook in real time. In a move that stunned the entire chamber, the Speaker of the House acknowledged something many thought impossible just weeks ago. Nigel Farage appears to be on track to become the next Prime Minister. That statement alone sent shockwaves through Westminster. But it did not come out of nowhere. It followed what some are now calling the most blistering and consequential speech ever delivered in the Commons.
Can you trust him? Can you trust him with your future? Can you trust him with your jobs? Can you trust him with your mortgages, your pensions, your bills? And he gave the answer on Tuesday, a resounding no. He set out economic plans that contained billions upon billions of completely unfunded spending. Precisely the sort of irresponsible splurge that sent your mortgage cost, your bills, and the cost of living through the roof. It's Liz Truss all over again.
At the centre of the uproar stood Farage. No longer dismissed as a fringe figure, he stepped into the chamber like a man on a mission. His tone was calm, but his message was ruthless. He did not merely criticise the status quo, he took a sledgehammer to it. Labour and the Conservatives were both torn down, not with shouting, but with precision and timing. And the impact was immediate. Keir Starmer, once hailed as a unifying force with a powerful mandate, began to unravel before the public eye. The atmosphere shifted. The political centre of gravity moved. And Farage was at the heart of it.
Obviously, he's Prime Minister. He's got a lot on. But he cleared his diary, set up an entire event purely to get some of the media there, though that proved quite tricky because of trains and all the rest of it. But, you know, dragged them there and then proceeded to criticise Nigel Farage. And so, you know, it's sort of a risky strategy in some ways, isn't it? Because it elevates Nigel Farage. He actually said the choice is between Labour and Reform, you know, basically writing off the Conservatives and saying they're finished. It's now going to be between me and him. So I suppose the risk is that it gives Nigel Farage more credibility. I think what Labour is hoping for is that it means more scrutiny for Reform UK's policies.
The day began quietly enough. The benches filled, MPs chatted, and the routine hum of Parliament carried on like any other session. But when Nigel Farage walked in, everything changed. There was a shift, not in volume, but in energy. It was the entrance of a man who looked entirely certain that his moment had arrived. For years, Farage had operated on the margins, a political agitator, a thorn in the side of Brussels, a disruptor who never quite broke into the corridors of power. But today, that dynamic flipped. He did not walk into Parliament as a protester, he entered as a contender. Confident, focused, measured. And then came the speech. What followed was not a rant or a stunt, it was a controlled demolition. Farage dismantled the Labour leadership with methodical ease. Then, without missing a beat, he turned on the Conservative front bench and stripped them down to caricatures. Every line landed. Every pause felt intentional. There was no pandering, just attack after attack delivered with absolute clarity.
His policy platform, what he was saying signals what they might do if they were to ever form a government. And in it, he announced some things like lifting the cap on benefits for children. So at the moment, there's a limit. So some means-tested benefits were only applied to 2 children. He said he'd scrap that. He'd reverse the winter fuel payment in full. He reiterated the party's position on income tax, which is that you wouldn't start paying it till you earn £20,000. When you add all of that up, it runs into the billions. And Nigel Farage pointed to some things that he said he would do to try and claw back some of that money to pay for it, like getting rid of diversity schemes, ending hotel accommodation for asylum seekers, getting rid of quangos, wasteful spending, net zero. Without spelling out a lot of the detail, it has to be said about how exactly you do any of that or how much it would roll up to. And so what now you're seeing the lines, and it's interesting actually because this started earlier on the week because I was at that Nigel Farage press conference, and on the day I was getting messages on my phone from the other parties going, how's he going to pay for this? How's he going to, so the sort of counter briefing started all the way through the week, and it's continued with Keir Starmer today. And what he's effectively trying to do is draw a comparison between Nigel Farage and Liz Truss. And that's, you heard him say it in his speech today. So it is to the point that Vicky made about trying to question the credibility and put the spotlight on scrutiny of Reform UK and some of their policies. But I think the politics around it is quite risky.
In those few minutes, Farage no longer felt like a guest in the room. He became the central figure in British politics, and everyone knew it. Farage did not waste time. His first strike was aimed directly at Keir Starmer. It was not just political opposition, it was a personal dissection. He accused Starmer of leading without conviction, of making promises with no intention or ability to deliver. And, as he spoke, the chamber watched something rare. A sitting Prime Minister visibly faltering. Starmer, who had built his rise on promises of stability and competence, appeared shaken. His usual composure gave way to hesitation. He looked less like a leader in control and more like a man caught off guard in his own house. Farage's criticism echoed frustrations already simmering within Labour's base. Broken promises, slow reforms, a growing sense that the new government had already lost its grip. Farage gave voice to that anger, and the effect was immediate. His message resonated not because it was loud, but because it mirrored what many had been thinking. The atmosphere in the chamber changed. What started as a critique began to feel like a reckoning. Starmer did not just lose the room, he lost control of the moment. After shaking the Prime Minister, Farage shifted his focus, and Labour's front bench braced for impact. His next target was Chancellor Rachel Reeves, and the tone grew even sharper. What he delivered was not policy debate or economic analysis, it was character judgment, delivered with icy precision. Farage painted Reeves as overwhelmed and unprepared. According to him, she had stepped into one of the most critical roles in government without the tools to lead or the clarity to decide. It was not just a political jab, it was a public shaming. Reeves, normally composed, appeared visibly unsettled. Others beside her avoided eye contact, but Farage was not finished. With Labour wounded, he turned and fired at the Conservatives with equal force. And he did not go for the institution, he went for the personalities. He mocked Robert Jenrick not just for his politics, but for the way he dressed, the weight loss medication he allegedly used, and the lengths he had gone to rebrand himself. Every insult had a point behind it. Cosmetic change, he argued, could not save a party that had already collapsed from within. Farage made it personal, but he also made it land. Farage then delivered a line that stopped the chamber cold. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but it shifted the foundation of decades-old political thinking. With calm certainty, he declared that the traditional choice between Labour and the Conservatives no longer applied. Reform was no longer a protest vote. It was, in his words, the only vote that still meant anything. This was more than a slogan. It was a challenge to the entire electoral map of the United Kingdom. For generations, voters were told that backing smaller parties risked letting the opposition in. But Farage flipped that logic on its head. In his framing, voting Conservative now served no purpose other than to delay the inevitable. The silence in the chamber spoke volumes. Many MPs, even those on the opposing benches, seemed aware that something irreversible had just been said. The usual jeering gave way to a sort of stunned quiet. This was no longer a fringe figure delivering angry sound bites. It was a man dismantling the assumptions that had propped up British politics for decades, and doing so in front of a captive, speechless audience. The speech ended, but the shock had only just begun. As murmurs rippled through the benches, all eyes turned to the speaker. Normally a figure of restraint and procedure, he did something that broke every expectation. He stood and acknowledged, aloud, that Nigel Farage appeared to be on the path to becoming Prime Minister. No votes had been cast, no motions had passed. But the chamber froze. The Speaker's words were not legally binding, but they carried the weight of institutional recognition. In that single moment, the political reality shifted. What had felt like a theoretical rise suddenly became official in tone, if not in law. Journalists in the press gallery scrambled for phones. Members whispered in disbelief. Constitutional scholars were already drafting responses before the Speaker sat back down. Farage did not need to respond. He stood calm, eyes forward, posture firm. For the first time in his long and controversial career, he was not the outsider demanding attention. He was the focal point of a political system that now had no choice but to take him seriously. In a parliament built on tradition, today marked a break from everything familiar. While the chamber was still processing the Speaker's statement, attention turned back to Keir Starmer, and what many described was not just defeat but collapse. Witnesses reported a complete shift in his demeanour. The Prime Minister, who had once projected control and certainty, now appeared lost. His hands trembled. His face was pale. He struggled to respond, as if the weight of the moment had drained every ounce of resolve. Colleagues flanked him with concern, and within minutes, he was quietly escorted out of the chamber. It was a moment few could believe they were witnessing. Starmer had entered office with a landslide promising competence and renewal. Yet here he was, brought to the edge by a man holding a fraction of the seats in Parliament, undone not by scandal or rebellion, but by a single speech that spoke directly to the country's discontent. What happened in that chamber went beyond personal embarrassment. It signalled the crumbling of an image Labour had carefully crafted over months. In a room built for debate, Starmer had no words left. And as he disappeared behind closed doors, the message was clear. Power had begun to slip from his hands. The Speaker's declaration, the Prime Minister's breakdown, and Farage's unrelenting speech all collided to mark a historic shift, one that no spin doctor or party whip could contain. In a matter of minutes, the familiar structure of British politics looked outdated. The Labour majority no longer felt like a shield. The Conservative opposition no longer looked relevant. And Nigel Farage, once mocked as a sideshow, now stood as the most powerful man in the room.
Deal that's been done hasn't been implemented yet between the UK and the
some people
US.
say it's not even a trade deal. You can't even call it that.
No, it's well, yes, a mini trade deal. But if that's not even in place,
compact.
I think the issue is now whether there's just more chaos and therefore the American administration is so distracted. Does that ever get over the line? And
the good point is it's potentially we could end up having our exemption, our reduction of tariffs on steel and cars. That's tick, and potentially we lose the 10% baseline tick. So potentially that's good. The risk is that this legal uncertainty means that our own UK-US compact agreement deal, whatever we want to call it, doesn't actually come into force as quickly as we thought it was. And we don't get that exemption that is so important for companies like JLR and others.
And presumably what it also does is, because obviously if you believe Donald Trump and what he said about this, part of the reason for the tariffs in the first place at the level they were was to force the hand of other countries to come to the table so he could negotiate trade deals with them. And presumably what this does now...
What made the moment even more unsettling was its clarity. Farage did not plead for legitimacy. He took it. He spoke with the poise of someone who had been preparing for this for years. He had no official mandate, but his presence filled every inch of the chamber like he already belonged there. And perhaps, after today, he does. Across Britain, the public watched with mixed emotions. Shock, anger, vindication, hope. But one feeling overpowered them all. The sense that something irreversible had just happened. Farage is no longer campaigning from the sidelines. He is no longer asking to be taken seriously. After today, he is being measured for the very office he has chased for decades. And nothing in Westminster will ever be the same. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.